Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 18, the digestive system. So this one, this organ system, I'm sure you already know a lot about it. So we'll just go ahead through some of the definitions and where things are, but then we'll go into the diseases of the digestive system. So that should be something fairly new. And here's our learning objectives. And then, sorry for the typo with the 16. That's obviously chapter 18 is what we're on. And then, so the digestive system, it's an organ system. So we often think of the digestive system as just being our stomach, but it actually isn't. It starts from the mouth with the teeth and then goes down to the stomach. And so there's quite a few organs in it. And we know that because an organ system is a collection of organs. And one organ is a collection of tissues. And a collection of tissues is a collection of cells. And all the cells are the same in a tissue. And then the tissues can be arranged in a lot of different ways to make the particular organ. So the digestive system, its principal job is digestion. And the structure itself of the digestive system is it's an irregular tube. So if we think of a garden hose that starts in your mouth and comes out your anus, it's an open-ended, a dual open-ended tube. What goes in one end comes out the other eventually, but it's not that regularly shaped like a garden hose. It's got a lot of irregular twists and turns, and that's evident in the intestines. And we'll see also the few of the other structures too, and their irregular shape as well. So it keeps you that irregular shape. You'll see that again in the urinary system, where the tubes are actually called convoluted tubes, and they don't. The purpose again is to not have a straight. You don't really want a straight tube. So if this was your mouth up here, and then coming out the rest of your body, you don't really want a straight tube because you don't want food to move that fast through your body. You want it to slow down so that there's enough time for the digestive system to break the food down and then for that food to get into all of the cells and consequently nourish your body. So the principal structure of the digestive system is an irregular tube, and it's referred to as the alimentary canal or the gastrointestinal tract. And then you have accessory organs of digestion, probably which would be the teeth and a few others, but we'll get into those. So in order for the digestive system to do its job, you have to first eat. Food has to be digested and absorbed, and so that's what we're going to look at here. So we're going to, well, actually the location first. So here's our digestive organs. And so you can see here that, so you can see the beginning of the tube right here. And or right over here, right where the mouth is, the tongue. So here's your mouth, and then the tube begins right here, and it goes down. But then it doesn't go straight out. Rather, instead, you have the liver and you have the gallbladder. Here's your stomach right there. So this tube gets a little convoluted and carrying things into the stomach, and then from the stomach we go into the intestinal tract. You got 22 feet of intestines in your stomach, and then you see the sigmoid colon coming out, and then the rectum. And also the appendix right here too. The appendix is a part of the colon. So the anal canal is itself an additional canal or another canal part of the system here. So you end up with a big area of your stomach being occupied, or the big area of the abdominal region. Your stomach is one organ, but a big region of your abdominopelvic region, or abdominopelvic cavity, is occupied by the digestive system. And then let me erase a little bit of that over here. So I did all that scribbling and I hid the liver. So we want to take a look at that right here too. So our liver's off to the side, and but the one thing I wanted to call your attention to is the gallbladder. So you probably have heard about gallbladder surgery. So the gallbladder produces gall or filters gall, and it's connected. It kind of like you got this little common hepatic duct right there where it goes into the liver, and then you have another one that just kind of It's hidden, but it burrows deep within the liver down this way. It comes out of the gallbladder and goes up into the liver from underneath. And oftentimes that gallbladder gets infected. You get gallstones, so the stones harden. And once it's removed, it's no big deal. The liver still does its job, and you won't even notice you won't even miss it when you get the gallbladder taken out. But that's where that's located. It's that little green thing, and you can tell in this picture here that it's actually hidden pretty good buried pretty good underneath the liver, and then integrate it with those the common hepatic duct and the cystic duct. And the cystic duct's hard to see. It kind of dips underneath that part right there. So we'll go on to the next slide now. And here's all of the organs. So the organs of the digestive system. So the digestive system, again, is a collection of organs. So here's all your accessory organs, all your accessory organs, and it does include the teeth and the tongue, salivary glands, tonsils, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. And then the vermiform appendix, or your appendix. So yeah, that's the formal name right there, but we call it the appendix. So digestion is the physiology. The anatomy is all your structures, and then the physiology of the digestive system is digestion. So you ingest food first. That's when you're eating, you're taking in food. So complex foods are brought into the GI tract. So you eat it, you bite into it, and then those complex foods are swallowed, and those foods are broken down when you chew it, but then they go into the GI tract and work their way into the stomach, and then eventually out of whatever's not used turns into waste, but whatever is used gets absorbed into the other cells. And then once you ingest that food, that's when digestion begins. And digestion itself is a series of processes, or a group of processes that break down that food into simpler ones, break it down pretty much into the smallest molecule of glucose. So mechanical digestion is, we do that with our teeth. So we're breaking down large chunks of food into smaller bits by chewing it. And then the chemical digestion is the gastric juices within, or the gastric enzymes within your stomach, that's going to further break those molecules down into sugar. And then the term motility refers to a number of GI movements that result from muscular contraction. So the esophagus is going to have to contract a little bit. When you're swallowing, the intestines are also going to contract. Your stomach itself contracts as part of breaking down that food. So there's going to be a lot of muscular contractions going on that are going to move the food from your mouth down to the stomach, and from the stomach into the intestines, and then further breaking down the food and moving it into the cells that need the energy or the nutrients, and then of course whatever's left over, forming waste and moving it out of the body. So a few other terms of digestion or secretion. So secretion is when those digestive juices and the hormones as well are released and were released into the digestive tract, and they help break down the food, and they help absorb it too. So absorption is the movement of the digested nutrients into the internal environment of the body, which is just another way of saying the digested nutrients are moved into the cells, each individual cell. So all your cells get nutrients from digestion, including your skin, your hair, nails, everything. And that's in large part due to the circulatory system, the blood carrying those nutrients throughout the body and giving them to the cells that need them. And then digestion, the last part is regulation. So you have neural regulation that comes from the nervous system, hormonal regulation. So that would be like regulate the enzymes in the gastric juices, or the enzymes in the pancreas. So hormonal, referring to the enzymes, but that means the endocrine system is also a big part of digestion and helping to regulate that. And then several other mechanisms, again, like the muscular activity, everything that are needed to regulate digestion. So here's a summary of all the different mechanisms of digestion. And then the digestive tract, we need to talk about the wall of the digestive tract. So it's a tube that extends from your mouth to your anus, and the wall is formed by 4 different layers of tissue. Mucosa or mucous membrane is the first, and its type is the type varies depending on where in the GI tract you are. Though it's mostly stratified or delicate or simple epithelium, and its job is mucus production. And then submucosa would be the next layer, and it's that one's entirely connective tissue. And then the other 2 parts of the digestive tract, these are the last 2, the third and fourth layer of tissue. The muscular tissue, or muscularis layer, is circular, and it's also long and oblique in the stomach, where it forms layers of muscle. That's important to GI motility. Those movements or GI motility is that movement of food again through from the mouth all the way into the stomach and then out through the intestines and out of the body. So 2 types of muscular contractions. One is peristalsis, where it's a wave-like motion that pushes food down the tract. So you take food you take in food. So if you took food in your mouth, the food comes in, and then it starts to go down the tract. And so if we look back, find that earlier picture. So if we looked at, so we look here at the esophagus and larynx, but this is the esophagus where the food comes down. So you see that tube right there. It looks like it is a straight tube, but it's hollow, and it looks like food would just drop right on down. But that's not really true. I mean, there's a lot of times, you could choke to death. Something gets lodged in your throat, and you can choke. So what ends up happening when you have that tube, that long tube right there, it doesn't just sit idle and let the food drop down. Rather, it's a series of contractions that helps push the food down so that nothing gets lodged. Obviously, sometimes things do get lodged and you choke, but for the most part, that long tube. So we saw it in the picture as looking just like this right here. But the long tube, what ends up happening is you get these series of contractions, and they're mirrored on the other side. So what's the same on one side is the same on the other. And so the food comes in, and then right here is a contraction, and it's squeezing it. And then it goes into an enlarged area, and then it gets squeezed again, and then it goes into another area. And these contractions just keep pushing that food on down. But as they're pushing the food on down, the food breaks up too. It also helps to crush some of the food, or to soften it, or change its shape a little bit. So or the peristalsis ends up being that wave-like motion where you have this. You have the straight part, and then you have the straight part, and then you have a contraction, straight part and a contraction, and it continues on that way. So every time it contracts, you wind up with you wind up pushing that food down the tract. Segmentation, on the other hand, though, is more of a back and forth. So when the food gets down the esophagus, and then sometimes you have that backwash. It's kind of like you burp it up, and some of the food comes back up. Well, once the food gets down the esophagus, then wave-like or segmentation, that back and forth movement begins, and instead of having that solid object moving entirely through the intestines, food will be broken down now. That bolus or that ball that was moving through that we looked at before, now it's going to be more like instead of one ball that's getting crushed, now it's a bunch of little pieces, and these little pieces move, and then they move back this way, and then they can move this way. So they're kind of moving or bouncing back and forth. And eventually, slowly, they're getting pushed forward, though. Overall, you get a back and forth movement, but overall, the food is getting pushed forward. You have very little backwash or coming back out. And then the last of the four layers of the digestive tract is the serosa. So a serous membrane is covering, and outside is the cover. It covers the outside of the abdominal organs, and then it actually attaches the digestive tract to the wall of the abdominopelvic cavity, and by forming different folds called mesenteries. So a little definition there. So, I'm sorry. So here's a picture of that peristalsis, and so it's you have the ball right there, the bolus, and you get that contraction, and it just keeps contracting and pushing that ball through. And then segmentation, you have your contraction and your relaxation, and you can see the ball getting squished up. But eventually, it gets into the figure of what B looks like, part B, right over here. And you see it broken down, and then you see the contraction there breaking it up even more, and you see one here where this one's going to wash back, and then this one's going to go forward, and then eventually like, all these pieces up here are broken down to look at what's like to resemble what's you see in Figure C. And then here's your overview of your mouth cavity and tongue. So your teeth, being accessory organs, are part of the digestive tract, and here you see each of the teeth labeled, and what you have on this side of the mouth, you have on that side as well. And likewise here, if you divide that in the middle, they're symmetric on each side. So you have two of each. Two wisdom teeth on the bottom, two wisdom teeth on the top, although this one doesn't show it, and then you have your cuspids, your lateral incisors, two central incisors on down, and 6th-year molar, 1st molar. And then here's an actual picture of what the teeth look like, but I'm sure you know what your teeth look like. So your teeth, you have each tooth, a very typical tooth has three main parts, the crown, the neck, and the root. And the crown, I think, is pretty much what we look at. The enamel covers the crown, and it's the hardest tissue in the body. So enamel is harder than nail. So of course, I mean, you know how easy it is to break your fingernail, but when you think about all the things you bite into, you don't break your teeth. So enamel is the hardest. It covers the crown, and it's the hardest tissue in the body. So here's a longitudinal or cross section of a tooth. So the cusp is up at the top. That's pretty much the part that we see. And then the enamel, again, is the white part that covers it, the outermost part. And then the dentin is underneath the enamel. And the pulp of the tooth, or the bulk or the heart of the tooth, is the inner part. That's real soft, and it's got the nerves and veins running through it. And so your teeth are innervated, meaning you have nerves running through it. They're these yellow lines right over. It's these yellow lines in here, not the dentin. The yellow lines in here, and then the blue and the red are the arteries and veins. So they're the vessels carrying blood or nutrients to your teeth, and then the nerves are carrying sensation. So you don't want an exposed nerve in your teeth. That's obviously painful. And then you see around here, here's the neck. The neck is the part that meets with the gum, line, and that's where your gingiva is, or gingivitis, and inflammation, the gingiva. And then your root canal. Your roots, the canal right in here, this part right in here, the canal carries the nerve and the vessels. And then the root, the root canal, sits inside the periodontal ligament in here. And then cementum is your bottom part in here, where it's going to anchor or hold your tooth. And then of course the bone. The tooth is firmly seated inside the bone. And so you got your whole root right down here, which would be this whole part here. And then here's the canal itself that carries the veins and the nerves. So you have different types of teeth, incisors, canines, which are also cuspids, premolars or bicuspids, and then your molars, which are also your tricuspids. So you have a set of 20 teeth called the deciduous or baby teeth. And the average age of getting your first tooth is about 6 months old when you start teething. And then you have a complete set at approximately 30 months old. and then they all fall out, and you get your permanent teeth, which you have 32 of. So you first start getting your permanent teeth at around 6 years old, and you have a completed set between the ages of 17 and 24. So it's a set because you have two of everything. So what you have from the center to the left, you also have from the center to the right. So within your mouth are the salivary glands, and they produce saliva. So they're exocrine glands, and the secretion flows into ducts that are carried throughout the body. And then serous type saliva is a watery fluid that contains enzymes, particularly salivary amylase, but there's no mucus in that. So that's your spit. The saliva is what you would spit out, but there's no mucus in that unless you have a cold and you're coughing up mucus that's generated in your lungs. And then the mucus type saliva is very thick and slippery, no enzymes in that. That's usually what you would cough up. But then when you're chewing, mastication is the formal name for chewing. So when you're chewing that, you're getting a thicker type of a saliva or a thicker type of excretion that helps keep your mouth from drying out, but it also aids in breaking down the food. The largest the salivary glands are the largest ones, and they produce the serous type saliva. And then mumps are a type of infection within the mouth or face, and they affect the parotids. And then in addition to your salivary glands being the largest of the glands within the digestive tract, you also have the submandibular glands, and they're a mixed type glands. They're both serous and mucus, and they're located below the mandible or below the mandibular angle, so that's like near the jawbone. And the ducts open on either side of the lingual frenulum that's located within the mouth. And then your sublingual glands produce only mucus-type saliva, and they have multiple ducts that open into the floor of the mouth. And here's where they are. So you have your parotid gland up near your cheekbone, and the parotid duct mostly into the cheekbone. Submandibular glands, that's in your jawbone. And then the submandibular duct is pretty much getting up to near your chin bone. And then here you can see the shape of the ducts too, and they're little cuboid cells within them. And then the pharynx has three anatomic components, the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. So the oropharynx is mostly involved in segment and digestive processes, a segmentation part of digestion, as well as in swallowing or deglutition. It was the formal name of swallowing. And then you have regulation of deglutition movements are done, that regulation occurs within the cortex of the cerebrum, and it's a voluntary motion. But then the deglutition center is within the brainstem, and that part's not voluntary. So that part, meaning when it's involuntary, you're going to have that saliva production even when you're not thinking about it. Like you can't will that to happen. And then there's your pharynx, and in the three parts right there, the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. And then your esophagus connects the pharynx to the stomach, and it's a great passageway for food. The upper esophageal sphincter helps prevent air from entering the tube during respiration. So all the air during respiration would stay in the trachea at that point. If the sphincter didn't work, then you would get some air in your throat as well, and breathing would not be as productive. And then the lower esophageal sphincter allows food to enter the stomach by passing through the sphincter, also called the cardiac sphincter. And then your stomach is the one we know best, the organ we know best. It's pretty big. Actually, it's about the size of a fist. So it expands after a large meal, and when it's empty, it's about the size of an empty sausage. So yeah, not quite the size of a fist, a little longer than a fist when it's empty. So food enters the stomach through the lower esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter, and then the pyloric sphincter muscle closes the opening between the pylorus, which is the lower part of the stomach, and the duodenum to keep the food in place long enough to allow for digestion. And then the wall of the stomach is smooth muscle. It's all smooth muscle. and it has a lot, or does a lot of contractions to produce the churning movements, that peristalsis. So it's not the segment, we see the peristalsis being a little bit of segmentation and then the breaking down too of the food. And lining of the stomach against mucous membrane, very many microscopic glands that secrete the gastric juices, as well as hydrochloric acid into the stomach. And then the stomach membrane has all those folds that, or rugae, when the stomach's empty. So when the stomach contracts, it's not just like a shrinking balloon. So if you think of a large balloon and then it gets cold and the balloon shrinks, that's not what's happening in the stomach. Again, the stomach has all these membranes that have to fold over on top of each other when it's empty, and then they expand when the stomach's full. So here's what all the different muscles look like. So you have the esophagus coming into the stomach and it's located at the fundus of the stomach, or the top of the stomach. And then we see the other end of the stomach's the duodenum. That's the part where food exits the stomach. And the pyloric sphincter is shown in the open state right now. So the pyloric sphincter is right there. And here's the pylorus, is the bottom of the stomach, whereas the fundus is the top. So food's churning all in here, and the sphincter stays closed, so it doesn't immediately drop out and go and leave your body. The sphincter keeps the food located in place, and it keeps it there long enough to allow for digestion to occur, and then consequently the nutrients to get into the other cells. So digestion typically takes a couple hours, so that's why it's really important to have that sphincter functioning very well. You don't want food, again, leaving your body that fast. But an interesting thing to look at right here, here's a muscular layer, the longitudinal muscular layer that we just briefly mentioned. So that's right here, and then it's longitudinal, so the tissues are long ways right there, and then you have the circular part here, and then you have the oblique part. So 3 different patterns of muscle tissue forming the stomach, and the 3 different arrangements like that help to make sure that that the contractions of the stomach are happening, but also happening in an irregular pattern. It's not an all or nothing. Some parts can contract more efficiently than others, or have a stronger contraction. And they all depend, though, on the type of food, which one exerts its force the greatest. Depends on what food you're eating at the moment and how much breakdown is needed. So when we get from the stomach, the food then goes into the small intestine. It leaves the stomach through the duodenum and enters into the small intestine, which is about 20 feet long, but only about 2 centimeters or so in diameter. And then the 3 divisions, the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. So I'm sorry, I said it left the stomach through the duodenum and then into the intestine. So it leaves the stomach into the duodenum, but the duodenum is a part of the intestine. So here's your intestine all together right here, and all the different tissues. And again, you see the 2 different types of muscle here. You don't see the oblique muscle in the small intestine. You just see the longitudinal and circular muscle, but not the oblique muscle in the small intestine. So you have your 2 different muscle types, and their contractions produce peristalsis, or segmentation. It's a mucous membrane, small intestine lined with the mucous membrane. A lot of different intestinal glands, again, secreting intestinal juice to help the digestion. And then the villi is the microscopic fingers that are part of the mucosa, and they also help with shuffling food on through the intestine. And the villi contain the blood and the lymph capillaries, which is a little unusual because the villi in the nose does not. So the villi in the intestine, I think, is the only one that has the blood vessels in it. And then you have your liver and gallbladder. The liver is the largest gland in the digestive tract, larger than the stomach, and it fills the upper right section of the abdominal cavity and extends over into the left side, or is predominantly into the left side. So its job is to secrete bile, and then you have a few ducts in there. The hepatic duct drains the bile from the liver. Cystic duct is the duct by which bile enters and leaves the gallbladder from the liver. And then the common bile is formed by a union of the hepatic and cystic ducts. and it brings drains the bile into the duodenum. And the gallbladder is under the surface of the liver. I showed you that one, that little green thing. And it concentrates and stores bile produced in the liver. And eventually that bile can harden and you can get gallstones. So here it is again. Here's that picture of our gallbladder and bile ducts. Same thing we looked at in the earlier lecture. And but here you can see a little more clearly in this picture. You can see the hepatic duct, the right and left hepatic duct, but this one's squeezing pretty much into the liver, and same with this one too. It just plugs right in and acts as a drain of the bile from the liver. And then we have our pancreas, and it's an exocrine gland below that lies behind the stomach, and pancreatic cells secrete pancreatic juices, particularly the digestive juices, into the pancreatic ducts, which empty into the duodenum. And the pancreas looks like little islets. We often refer to as pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans. So the cells are not connected with the pancreatic duct, but they secrete glucagon and insulin into the blood, and that's what regulates sugar in your blood levels. And then your large intestine has the two divisions, the cecum and the colon. And the colon is your large intestine, the ascending, transverse, and descending, and then the sigmoid rectum, all part of the colon. So food enters the ileocecal valve, and then through the ileocecal valve, and then into the external opening called the anus. And then the walls of the intestine are all smooth here, smooth muscle fibers. They also contract to form churning as well as peristalsis and then defecation, because the last part of the large intestine is the colon, or which is in the sigmoid, rectum or anal canal, and so food comes out of that part of the sigmoid colon, the end part of the colon, into the anus and then out of the body, and the lining there is a mucous membrane. So here's what that looks like. Here's what our large intestine looks like. So we have the ascending colon right here, the ascending colon right here. So it's this part that's going upward. And then here's the transverse colon, and then the descending colon, and then here's your sigmoid colon, and then here's your rectum. So the sigmoid colon comes right down and goes right into the rectum. And then this is the anal canal, out of which comes feces or fecal matter. And then the appendix is, it's right here. If we look at this picture right there, it's that little appendage sticking out. So the appendix, often called or not quite as commonly called the vermiform appendix. And it looks like a little worm or tubular structure. And it's attached directly to the back of the cecum. Contains a blind tube-like interior lumen that communicates with the lumen of the large intestine. No important digestive functions. I'm not even sure what the communication is between them. It's just not a very important appendage or organ at all. And again, when you remove that, you don't even know it. You don't even miss it. But then when the appendix gets infected, though, you do know you have it. It's very painful, and then consequently you have to get it taken out. And then the peritoneum is it's a continuous serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity, and it covers the organs. So it's like a bag that all the abdominal organs are put into. And the peritoneum contains two layers, parietal and visceral. Parietal lines the abdominal cavity, visceral covers the actual organs. And then the peritoneal space is a small space between the parietal and visceral layers. And here's what that looks like. So the blue right here indicates the peritoneum. So it's a little hard to see. So I just wanted that on the outside. I'm just going to trace around that. So and so you see it's not back here in the green. It goes in here, and then it engulfs that organ, and it comes back up, and it engulfs this organ. Then it goes around the liver, and same thing down here. It's coming down here in these mesentery glands, and then it stays around. It goes in around here. It doesn't cover the rectum, and nor does it cover the actual urinary bladder. But here's where the anus would be, back in here. So it doesn't cover that either. It comes around here on top of the bladder, and then it continues on up straight unattended or unattached right there. So right in here too, it has engulfs that organ. Same here and here and here. So the peritoneum is the baggie that the organs are put in, and often wraps the organs themselves. So digestion itself transforms food into substances that can be absorbed and used by cells. Mechanical and chemical digestion. Mechanical is your chewing, often referred to as mastication, and then swallowing is deglutition. And then peristalsis is the breakdown of food into tiny particles that allows them to mix with the digestive juices and move through the entire digestive tract. And then chemical digestion is the release of enzymes to help in breaking food down. The enzymes in chemical digestion, enzymes are specialized proteins that they act as catalysts to start a reaction that breaks the food down. And that breakdown is called hydrolysis. So that breakdown usually always involves water, as evident by hydro. So here's the chemical digestion, all the different enzymes involved. So saliva, salivary amylase is your saliva enzyme. Pepsin is from protease, and it's a gastric juice. Pancreatic juice is or any kinds of proteases. There's quite a few of them. Lipases are fat emulsifiers. Pancreatic amylase makes starch or is starch. The substance digested is starch. And peptides, and then sucrose, lactase, and maltase. And you can see all the different functions. So digestion, carbohydrate digestion, occurs mainly in the small intestine. Pancreatic enzyme amylase breaks down the starches into double starches. And then the internal juices like maltase, sucrase, and lactase all digest a particular function or particular part of carbohydrates. So maltase digests malt sugar, sucrose digests, or sucrase digests sucrose, which is ordinary cane sugar, and then lactase digests lactose, which is milk sugar. So if you're lactose intolerant, you're not making enough lactase. So carb digestion occurs mostly in the small intestine with the assistance of the pancreatic enzyme amylase, also salivary amylase too. And they break down the polysaccharides or starches into disaccharides or double sugars. So polysaccharide is many saccharides, and it breaks it down into a simpler sugar, a double sugar. And then your intestinal juices also break down, help break down the food. And then your protein digestion starts in the stomach, and it's completed in the small intestine. So pepsin is the gastric juice that helps digest, or partially it helps digest proteins. Trypsin is the pancreatic enzyme that continues the digestion of proteins, and peptidases are the intestinal enzymes that complete digestion of partially digested food. And then we have fat digestion, done mostly by bile, which contains no enzymes, but the bile emulsifies fats, so it breaks fat droplets into really small droplets. And the pancreatic lipase changes the emulsified fats to fatty acids and glycerol in the small intestine. So if you don't have, so the bile, if you lose your gallbladder, the bile is still present in the liver to actually do the emulsification. And then absorption of the nutrients once the food's broken down. So your food gets broken down, and all those nutrients, those vitamins and minerals that's found in food, sugars, everything else, the nutrient absorption is the process by which the digested food moves from the intestine into the blood or the lymph. And then food and most water minerals and vitamins are absorbed from the small intestine. Some water and vitamin K are absorbed in the large intestine. And then the surface area and absorption is important. Structural adaptations increase the absorptive surface. Fractal geometry is the study of fragmented geometric irregular shapes, such as those in the lining of the intestine. And the purpose of it is to figure out just what that surface area does to absorption and the correlation between the size and the rate of absorption. So terms to know, bolus, that's a ball of food moved involuntarily from the mouth to the stomach. Chyme is the food mixed with gastric juices and broken down into semi-solid form. Jaundice is a yellowish skin color caused by bile buildup. So if the bile is building up in the gallbladder or in the liver, it's not draining, then you'll see a yellowish skin color. And if you leave it alone, if you start to see jaundice, you know something's wrong. So you need to get to the doctor really quick. And if you don't, you'll get that stabbing pain that feels like a knife is just stabbed right into your back and that somebody's twisting it. And that's an indication of the gallbladder being severely injured or broken down, so that you would need to actually get the gallbladder removed. And then ulcers are lesions that destroy the stomach. So an ulcerated stomach has a whole lot of ulcers in it, and it's ruining the intestinal lining, and that can cause a whole lot of complications. And then diarrhea, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but it's stools or fecal matter that becomes more fluid instead of solid. So here's some of our digestive disorders. Nausea is one of them. When you get that feeling of sickness in the stomach, whether it's because you ate something bad or you rode a roller coaster, but it causes that involuntary impulse to vomit. And in vomit, another name is emesis, and it's the expelling of undigested food or fluid from your mouth. So it's considered a really violent act because your stomach's churning and trying to digest the food, and then it's forcibly brought back up through your digestive tract and out of your mouth. And then constipation, obviously, is when defecation is delayed and the colon absorbs the excessive water from the feces, making them harder and drier. And when that occurs, it makes it really difficult to expel them from the body. And then diarrhea is too much water in there, and that makes the stools really soft, and then they just flood out of the body. And then other disorders that are not so common are cleft palate. So a cleft palate occurs when the palate of the mouth does not close properly during the early stages of fetal development. So that's something that's happening in utero. It's prior to birth, and the cleft palate forms. And same with the lip. You have a cleft lip, and then when the baby's born, the baby can't eat. It can't suck on a nipple, nothing, because the palate hasn't fully closed, nor has the upper lip. So it's surgically repaired to recreate what should have been a normal mouth. And then gingivitis is the disease of the gingiva or the gum. Periodontal disease is when that gingivitis gets worse and starts to go down to the bone area and hit the bone. Gastroesophageal reflux is GERD. That's when you're trying, your body or stomach kind of wants to push the food back out. But it's right below. The food doesn't come all the way up, but it irritates the bottom of the esophagus. And when that happens, if you leave this untreated, or you keep eating foods that make it happen, that irritation of the bottom of the esophagus leads to a cancer called Barrett's esophagus. And oftentimes you have to get that part of the esophagus cut out, surgically removed. And then inflammatory bowel disease, that's an irritation or an inflammation of the bowel, and it often brings on ulcerative colitis and a lot of diarrhea, chronic diarrhea actually, and it's really painful too, and affects about 1 million people. And the most irritating part or frustrating part is that chronic diarrhea. And then Crohn's disease is often associated with irritable bowel syndrome, as is the ulcerative colitis. So you have, with ulcerative colitis, you have ulcers in the colon and the rectum, and it usually affects only the innermost lining of the colon and rectum. Crohn's disease, though, penetrates every layer of the tissue and affects every area. So patients with Crohn's could have remissions and then flare-ups. With Crohn's, there's a lot of talk about just removing the part of the colon that's affected. And so some people have done that, but it's hard to say how effective it is. And then a hiatal hernia, that's actually a rupture that occurs when the stomach protrudes above the diaphragm and then protrudes into the esophagus. So it's not uncommon in people over 50. Changes in diet often relieve it. Surgery is not required, but oftentimes it is done. People usually don't like the discomfort associated with hiatal hernia, so they get the surgery, which puts a little rubber band around the protrusion, and it helps to stop the it helps to stop the stomach from protruding into the diaphragm. And then heartburn is heartburn is different than hiatal hernia, and it's also different than gastroesophageal reflux. So heartburn is just literally acid indigestion, and it results from the backflow of the acidic gastric juices and it goes into the lower esophagus. So there's a lot of causes to it. GERD could eventually cause heartburn, but it's different. They are two different things. And then pyloric stenosis, that's a narrowing of the pyloric sphincter at the lower end of the stomach, and it's often found in infants, but not so much in adults. And with an infant, it results in projectile vomiting. And so that means, you know how when we vomit, it's a forcible bringing up of food. But when the infant has pyloric stenosis, the food actually, when the baby vomits, the vomit doesn't stay near the baby's body. It literally, it's like the baby is forcibly spitting, and the vomit turns into a projectile. And then gastritis, that's an acute or chronic inflammation of the stomach lining, usually caused by bacteria or a virus. So when you say you have a stomach cold, what you really have is gastritis. And then gastroenteritis is an inflammation as well, but it's of the mucous membrane lining the stomach and the intestinal tract, usually caused by a virus. And here you get diarrhea and vomiting for about 24 to 34 hours, 24 to 36 hours. And if you have this for a long time, though, you end up being really dehydrated. I mean, if you go within that 24 to 36 hours, you'll still get a little dehydrated. But if it persists more than that, you can expect to be very dehydrated. The difference with gastritis, the difference between gastroenteritis and gastritis is that it's often gastritis can also occur after eating certain foods that just don't agree with you. So it doesn't always have to be caused by a bacteria or a virus. And then the gastritis produces a lot of pains. You feel really gassy and bloated. You feel nauseous, and of course vomiting too. And then enteritis, the difference there is enteritis is just literally the inflammation of the intestine, and it doesn't involve the stomach. So this is just an intestinal inflammation caused by a bacteria or a virus or a protozoa infection. If you drank like pond water, that would irritate your intestine. And then ulcers are sores or lesions that form in the mucosal lining. Appendicitis, we talked about that. Hepatitis involves the liver, and hepatitis is an inflammation of the actual liver. Clinical symptoms are usually get a fever, very nauseous. You don't want to eat, so you can get very anorexic if left unchecked. And then, of course, the jaundice or yellowing coverage, or yellowing coloring and of your skin. Most people have heard of Hep A, but there's different strains of the virus. So A, B, C, D, and E are the 5 strains. And then standard precautions associated with each one that you need to follow. Cirrhosis, that's also a liver disease. Often you hear cirrhosis of the liver all in one. And it's a chronic, so it happens all the time. It's not a one and done type disease. So it's a chronic or a recurring progressive inflammatory disease of the liver, usually characterized by a replacement of normal tissue with some kind of a fibrous connective tissue. About 3/4 of the cases are caused by excessive alcohol consumption. But then you could also get a viral hepatitis, or which can also cause cirrhosis. So the term cirrhosis is usually, you often hear of it as sclerotic. So there's a lot of lesions involved too. And if it gets really bad, the liver's often removed. And then we have our next one is cholecystitis. So cholecystitis is an inflammation of the gallbladder, and often because the cystic ducts got blocked up. And then gallstones are the formal name of gallstone is cholelithiases, which is a collection of crystallized cholesterol in the gallbladder, and combined with bile salts, so the bile gets hardened. It mixes with the crystallized cholesterol, and the bile hardens up, and it turns into stones that can block the bile duct. And that blockage is what causes you the pain and all kinds of digestive disorders. And then pancreatitis is an inflammation of the pancreas. And the pancreas can become edematous, swollen, full of fluid, and it can be hemorrhagic. It can be bleeding, or it can be necrotic. And if it's necrotic, that means it's dead. That means the cells have died. And then diverticulosis is a condition in which the little diverticula, which are little sacs, they develop in the wall of the colon. And the majority of people age 60 or over have this condition. So it's really prevalent, but most of the time people don't have any symptoms and wouldn't even know that they have diverticulosis unless they had an x-ray. It's different than diverticulitis. Diverticulitis, anything that ends in itis, itis means inflammation. So diverticulitis is an inflammation of the wall of the colon, whereas diverticulosis is the development of those little sacs. People, even though most people are asymptomatic with diverticulosis, some people experience the pain of it when they eat things like little seeds. Anything that has little seeds, like strawberries, have all those little seeds. Well, those little seeds get into into the diverticular sacs that are forming, and when they get into that sac, they irritate it and cause a lot of inflammation. Very painful, with a very painful condition. And then the other painful condition is hemorrhoids. And so they're a condition in which the veins around the anus, so it's all the veins in the anal canal or in the anus or lower rectum, the veins become swollen and inflamed. And it usually results from straining during defecation. So if a person's constipated and they're straining to push the feces out, that would cause a hemorrhoid. That straining could cause all the veins in the lower rectum to swell, lower rectum and anus to swell, and that swollen and inflamed vein is called a hemorrhoid. Contributing factors, people more likely to get hemorrhoids are older people or those suffering from constant constipation or chronic constipation. Pregnancy also is a condition for hemorrhoids because of a lot of the pressure on the anus as the baby is growing within the womb. And then our last disease or digestive disorder is cancer, and the cancer can hit both the stomach and the colorectal area. So cancer of the stomach is often called gastric cancer, and it can develop in any part of the stomach and then spread throughout the stomach and then onto the other organs in the digestive tract. Stomach cancer is very hard to diagnose. Oftentimes there's no symptoms in the early stages, and then in many cases the cancer is spread elsewhere before it's found. So it may spread to the liver, and you might end up with severe liver pains in that area, and then that leads to a diagnosis of cancer. But it's a very difficult cancer to detect. And if it spreads, chemo is prescribed, and then radiation would have a limited role in trying to kill off wherever the stomach cancer tumors are. And then colorectal cancer involves the large intestine, while rectal cancer involves just the rectum. So colorectal cancer means both the rectum and the large intestine have cancer cells in them, whereas just rectal cancer is cancer cells are just in the rectum. But collectively, the two cancers are known as colorectal cancers. And number of cases, it's not as prevalent, and it's been declining over the years because of awareness of screening methods. that allow the precancer tissues in the colon to be removed. So that's what a colonoscopy is. They typically recommend the colonoscopy. I think it's when you're 50 or over. Because colorectal cancer often affects older people, and the polyps, basically what'll happen is the colonoscopy is the screening tool of choice, and you have a tube. The doctor takes a flexible tube that's equipped with a camera and inserts that camera through the anus and on into the colon, and the camera's taking pictures all along, and they're looking for polyps. And if the doctor sees a polyp, they'll typically remove it. People say that they take a sample or biopsy, but that's not really the case, because if it's cancer, then you got to do that test again. And that test, the colonoscopy, is a very uncomfortable test. So if during the colonoscopy they see a polyp, they'll take it out and they'll test it. And if it's not cancer, great. If it is cancer, then they've already removed it. And nothing more to worry about at that point. So the colonoscopy is a really important test to get. You don't want to put that off. Another way, even though the colonoscopy is the screening tool of choice, you can also do a stool sample. So that's like, I forget the commercial, but you probably see the Cologuard, the commercial for Cologuard, and you see the little test kit gets mailed to your house, and the person just takes a swab of stools or feces, puts it on a slide, sticks it in a padded envelope or mailer, and sends it into the lab for testing. And if something shows up funny, like if there's blood in the stool, then you would have to get a colonoscopy to make sure that it's not cancer, to figure out where the blood is coming from. It could be just that your stomach lining is irritated. May not necessarily be cancer. It could just be that there's an irritation somewhere in the body, and the blood from the irritation is coming out in the stools. But it's better to figure that out before it's too late. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll see you for the next one.